A report released overnight by the Justice Department shows that Special Counsel Jack Smith believed that there was enough evidence to convince Donald Trump for attempting to overturn the 2020 presidential election, but that Trump's election in November made it impossible to move forward with the case. And joining us now is former Assistant U.S. Attorney Roy Herrera, a partner in Herrera Arellano LLP. Roy, good to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. What exactly did the report focus on?
So the report related to the Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigation about election interference of Donald Trump and his subsequent criminal indictment related to election interference. And this all stemmed from the January 6th incidents and Trump's actions in the lead up to January 6th. This was a criminal indictment that was brought in the District of Columbia in federal court. And basically, this is a case that is now going to go away because Donald Trump is set to be the next president, I think, next week. And there's a longstanding Department of Justice policy that says that a sitting president can't be criminally prosecuted. So as a result, this prosecution goes away. In fact, Jack Smith is resigning. I think he maybe already resigned from the Department of Justice. So this is essentially his final word on the matter, his overview of the case and the factual findings of the case.
I was going to say, it's a final word on the matter, and there were a lot of people that are all excited, and here comes this report. This is stuff we've already known, isn't it?
That's right. From a factual perspective, there wasn't really anything new here that we didn't already know from the indictment itself and the subsequent filings that he filed in the case. I think the facts kind of are already out there, so there wasn't anything there. Instead, what I think was notable about the report was more his sort of parting words, his observations, one of which you referred to already, which is that he concludes that if the prosecution had been allowed to go forward, he believes that Donald Trump would have been found guilty, beyond a reasonable doubt, of the remaining claims of election interference.
It sounds like he didn't guarantee a conviction, but he says the evidence was there.
Exactly right. Now, what's sort of interesting about this case is, when I say the claims that are remaining, this relates, of course, to the U.S. Supreme Court's decision granting presidential immunity over certain official acts. This was an appeal of this underlying prosecution that went to the U.S. Supreme Court. So as a result, a certain number of the counts in Jack Smith's indictment were no longer valid. They couldn't proceed because they would have fallen under this presidential immunity. And instead, what was left were allegations related to what the special counsel called unofficial acts. And so what Jack Smith is saying here essentially is if those claims had gone forward, the prosecution had gone forward, he believes there would have been enough facts to get a guilty verdict.
But it's not going to go forward. And as you mentioned, the Supreme Court played, and even it sounds like in Smith's report, he says that the Supreme Court immunity, that's huge. That was absolutely huge.
Absolutely. So I think the second big takeaway from this report relates to the U.S. Supreme Court. So and this wouldn't be surprising, I think, to anyone, has a lot of criticisms of the court, both in the fact that the court took so long to hear the appeal on presidential immunity, which he says basically made it impossible for him to move forward in a timely manner, certainly before last November's election, on any kind of trial of Donald Trump. And then, of course, he criticizes on the merits the underlying decision on presidential immunity, saying it goes against all precedent.
He talks about the court taking its time. Did he mention the fact that Merrick Garland took his time?
He did not, certainly not in a direct way. Of course, that was, I suppose his boss in this. But certainly there's a lot of criticism of Merrick Garland now that we're at the end of all of this. And these criminal prosecutions are going to go away. I mean, there's another one in Florida, for example, and we can talk about that report, which did not get released. But these are going to go away. And I think right now there's a lot of, certainly if you're an opponent of Donald Trump and wanted to see these prosecutions go forward, a lot of criticisms of Merrick Garland's performance.
Let's talk about the Florida case, Kerry, because that's the missing documents. That's kind of part two. This was part one. And this is part two, and that's kind of still out there, but it's being held back. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, that's being held back. That wasn't released today. So both reports, both the report related to the election interference prosecution and this documents case in Florida, are reports that Donald Trump did not want to see released. And so he's been fighting in court to prevent those reports from being released. Of course, the one in D.C. related to election interference has been released. But so far, the judge in South Florida, the federal judge in South Florida, has held back the report related to the documents case. So we have not seen that yet. We will see as that goes through an appeal whether that report actually eventually gets released. One of the arguments that Donald Trump, and I think the judge makes in that case, is that there's still co-defendants in that case, that those prosecutions could potentially continue because, of course, they're not ex-presidents.
Are there people in that case that have the immunity umbrella covers them?
Well, it's interesting. I think not, because for example, the other person that was prosecuted in that case was like his personal valet. So certainly that person wasn't president. So I doubt that he would be covered. That being said, the way that the Supreme Court, issued this decision on presidential immunity left a lot to be worked out by the lower courts, including what is an official act, what is not an official act. These are all things that presumably would have been worked out had these prosecutions moved forward, but certainly the one in D.C. is dead.
I noticed that in getting back to part one here, and Jack Smith in the report, he said that Trump's attorneys gave a, quote, a variety of false, misleading, or otherwise unfounded claims. One of those attorneys, Todd Blanche, I think he's going to be like Trump's pick for assistant attorney general, something like that. He could be in charge of special investigations once the Trump administration starts.
That's true, and that I think gets to why I think the Florida case is also going to go away. I mean, all of these prosecutions that have been in investigations done by the Department of Justice and Donald Trump are going to go away because ultimately there's going to be a new attorney general. His nominee is the former attorney general of the state of Florida, Pam Bondi, who's likely to get confirmed, and she will have the power ultimately to just decide that these particular investigations need to go away, and they likely will never come back. And so that will be sort of the end of the Department of Justice going after Donald Trump.
Well, but it could be the start of the new Department of Justice going after other folks.
It could be. Now, of course, on presidential immunity, it works both ways. I mean, I'm sure Joe Biden, to the extent that there's anybody out there in sort of Trump world that wants to go after him, the very same sort of principles would apply to him. But I think there is a fear, and this will come up, I think, in the confirmation hearings for the Attorney General and the FBI Director. There is a fear from some Democrats that it could be weaponized, to your point. I mean, that the FBI, the Department of Justice, could now go after political opponents.
The last question here. What do we take from all this as far as legal precedent, as far as just as a prosecutor, former prosecutor here, what do you take from all this?
Well, it's interesting. I've had the pleasure of being on this show, I think, for years now, talking about the long sort of saga related to first his impeachments and then the criminal prosecutions in 4 different jurisdictions of Trump. And now we're at the very end. And I think my main takeaway as a prosecutor, and I think Jack Smith, a former prosecutor, and Jack Smith alludes to this in the report, it's incredibly difficult to go after and investigate and criminally prosecute an ex-president. Because of the political power, because of the unlimited financial resources, it makes it almost impossible. And I think that is probably that along with the presidential immunity decision, is going to sort of chill any opportunities or thoughts about doing that going forward against any ex-president.
Roy Herrera, good stuff. Good to have you here. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.